I have the wonderful double privilege of first introducing Danielle as a library staff member. So first, welcome to the Washington County Public Library. We're very glad to host local author Danielle Bullen here. She has written just an amazing YA novel called Frostlight. It's a really beautiful story about finding hope in winter, which is something that we all need right now. And then I also had the privilege of doing the cover art. So Danielle's going to talk to us a little bit about the book, and then I'm going to talk about the process of making the art for the book, and then we'll open it up to some questions and just have a chat.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So I have a spiel written down that was kind of about writing the book and some thoughts that went into the initial creation process of the book, which I know a lot of you guys have had questions about that, and so we will have more opportunity for questions later. But we're going to go ahead and start with this. So this book is not my first book. I have 2 other completed works that are currently still sitting on my computer that have never seen the light of day. Until almost exactly a year ago, I had actually planned on this one joining them. However, I had a whole plan listed out. I was going to finish it, try a round of editing just for fun, for the experience sake, and then I was going to put it away so that it wasn't seen for another like 20 or 30 years, or maybe after my kids were grown when I was finally like, oh yeah, I should publish a book. But that was not God's plan. About a year ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a very dear friend and has been like a mentor to me for a lot of years, and he randomly turned to me and he was like, why haven't you published a book yet? And I was like, and I probably turned a little red, and I had like a million questions in my brain that I wanted to ask, but all that came out was kind of a bland sort of protest of, you haven't even read any of my books yet. I went home that night, and I prayed about it. I thought about publishing before, but it was the middle of January, and I had a full summer planned out, and was like, I don't have time for publishing. So I prayed about it some more, and about a week later, I started looking into the publication process. If anyone ever tells you that a book came out of just one thought, then they are either lying or looking at it sideways. That would be like saying that you came out of just one thought, or one idea. Stories come out of hundreds of thousands of different things, and this story is no different. I first started writing Frostlight at the end of a year that was long and really dark. God's faithfulness in that year could not be understated. But I felt worn out and had been recovering from some pretty major things. Frost was begun in an effort to begin writing again when life was darker than it had seemed in a long time, spurred on by 2 men in my life that I am very thankful for, my older brother and the same mentor I mentioned earlier. I wrote the first words in the back of a chunky old notebook in October. In November, I put pen to paper and wrote out this opening line. There's a stream that runs down from the Norang mountain range, through the trees, into the valleys, and by a log cabin, or something like that. And a week later, I scrapped it and started over again. And a week after that, I scrapped that and started over again. This book was written all over the country. I wrote it in the plains of Kansas and on a ranch in Colorado, and my favorite coffee shop in Abingdon that happens to be about the same age. That opened about 2 weeks after I wrote the first line. I wrote a few words crossing Kansas, and I tried to write in Colorado but got distracted by tea and the mountains. I wrote in a beach house in Florida while my grandfather still brewed downstairs, though now he's with Jesus. If I'm being honest, this book is only here because 2 times in the last 3 years, I said something kind of dumb after getting a dumb idea, and after a kick from a very dear friend, then ran with it. And I failed so many times, and found God's grace be more than sufficient each time. In December of 2020, I decided I was going to write a book in a month to surprise my little sister, Phoebe. And do you want to guess? At the end of a month, I had only about 20,000 words on a page and a whole bunch of ways how not to write a book. So I told my sister, who knew nothing about it up to that point, that I was writing a book and I would give it to her at the end of January. And by the end of January, I mean October. After months of travel and learning to see beauty again and God's grace, making me lose my own voice at the wonder of his name, I actually got to finish the book in late 2021. This book is here because God is faithful even to those who make messes out of things and don't know quite what they're doing. It's here because there's grace in brokenness. It's here because wounds do not heal themselves and relationships are made to take work, because all the best things in life do. And it's here because we get to write about the things that we know. And by God's grace, in the words of a friend, I know that winter is beautiful. I know it with every sharp breath, with skies full of stars, no longer blocked by humidity and leaves. And because there can be rest in the quiet things and silence that comes with cold. Because sometimes we hide away in too much of life, going and doing and striving too much, and forget to tend what is standing right in front of us. And it's also here because God is good. And I am really, really thankful and excited to get to share it with you guys today.
Yay! So should I talk about our... So I guess my story kind of picks up at the end of yours, because at the end of 2021, you came and visited me here at the library and said, I've read the book. Do you want to read it? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. So this was before you were even thinking about publishing it, right? And so she came to me and said, I read a book, do you want to read it? And so I read it first just like as a fan.
She was the second person to actually ever read the book. She read the very first draft.
Well, that was the first draft.
That was the first draft.
I really forgot, like, while I was reading it, that it was a first draft. And I'm rereading it now, now that it's been edited and published, and it still feels like it feels like I'm stepping back into the same world. So already, like, the first draft was really strong. And then a couple of months, or I guess, I read it in December, and then in February, you came back to the library again. Like, it's cool that we're having this here, because so many of our conversations around this book happened here. But, so Danielle came back and said, I'm thinking of publishing Frostlight. Do you want to do the cover for it? And I was like, because at the time, you were wanting a different style, like a more realistic style.
I was being kind of dumb about it and wasn't thinking about the actual
Dumb.
story. No, it wasn't dumb. I was like, I want to do something dark and edgy for the cover.
And if you've seen any of my artwork or just like met me as a person, dark and edgy is not like my personality at all. So I was like, and I had never done a book before. So I was like, I would love to do a book with you, but I don't know if I'm the right person to do this. And I really cared about the story too, and so I didn't want to mess it up for you. And also, is there anything you want to talk about with this quote up on the screen here at the beginning?
This is the very first quote that was ever written about the book before I even started writing. This was just a random thing I scrawled on the page, not the crooked one as you can see, because this one's obviously not crooked on paper, but it was actually the first one which I forgot about. So,
yeah, I really love, I'm just going to read it real fast. If there's a creator out there that I'm listening for the song the snowflakes sing, I've always seen his care in the spring, in the light of summer, and promise of autumn. But here I stand in a world of half winter, and I'm asking here in my heart, is there beauty in this season of death? Alvia aches, that's one of the supporting characters if you haven't read the book yet. But she tries to smile for that's another character for me, and I wonder, is there beauty in this? How can there be such a vast place of darkness if he is a king of light, or is he not a king of light? I'll hunt it, I'll find it up here, between moments I'll find it. If we are to be trapped here, then beauty will be found. And I don't know if you guys have felt, like around this time of year, January, once all the fun of Christmas is gone, and we're really settling into, oh, there's gonna be like another 2-3 months of just dark and cold, and lack of sunlight, and wet, and I really feel that heaviness. I don't know, this resonated with me, the story really did. And so I went home and prayed about it, and you prayed about it, and we texted each other later that night, and we were like, all right, let's do this. Let's make a book. So,
what was really funny though, is that Annie, we had our first meeting, and we sat down and talked about it at the Girl in the Raven, and she listened to me list off a couple of random words, and then went home and did a sketch of the final cover that you see. She went home and did the exact thing, and I was like, wow. Seriously, just I was spewing random words, and Annie was like, oh yeah, and then she just did it, and I was like, what on earth? How did you get that from that?
I think it's very helpful that we're friends, and also that you're a photographer and a very visual person, because you have very specific words to use when you're describing visual things, and our brains work very similarly because we're friends. So yeah, we went to the Girl in the Raven. The thing one of the things I love about Danielle is that because she's a photographer, she takes selfies at every given occasion. So I have selfies from that day. And yeah, we sat down and sketched out. So those top 2 photos on the left, those really messy ones, I had like about 25 of those. And I was like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And I think probably only Danielle would have looked at that and been like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Let's talk through that. So she is also a really great creator of Pinterest boards. She had about like 5 different Pinterest boards for Frostlight that we used, which was very helpful. Lots of different pictures of that kind of reminded us of Annika, the main character. We decided that we wanted her hair to be a really big part of the cover because she's a redhead and she's got like this wild, messy, and she's kind of like a big blotch of color in this colorless world. And then the sheep and the Callie, the lanterns, there were like all of these, we made a big list of like elements, I guess, that the stag, yeah, things that were kind of symbols from the story that we wanted to work into the cover somehow. And then we took a walk out into our YA section and started randomly yanking books off the shelves, which was really nice. So this one is the one that which one is this again? An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, the illustrations by Charlie Bowater. You told me what you liked about this cover when we pulled it off the shelf.
I liked the profile and the movement were 2 of the things that we talked about specifically with it.
Yeah.
Which is something you kind of feel in Amy's final version is we still have the profile, which she went with and did really well. And we also ended up with not movement, but very much a stillness, which I really appreciated.
And then the one that I pulled off the shelf and also thought about a lot was The Good Hawk by Joseph Elliott. And that is done by Anna and Elena Balbuso are the illustrators on that one. And also with the profile and the movement, but I liked how the girl was kind of mashed up with all of these different creatures from the story and different symbols from the story. So we sketched a lot, we talked a lot, we went back and forth on Pinterest and Facebook a lot. And then I sent to Danielle these 3 concepts for the cover. And I guess I can tell which one we went with because originally the idea was to do like 1 round of concepts and then like take what we liked from different ones. But then once I sent these to Danielle, you were like, yep, the middle one, let's do it. And I was like, okay. But I think it's cool also to see like, we tried the profile, we tried her from the back, like with the title being on her hair down, with the flower in her hand, which kind of becomes a big important symbol in the story. And then on the far right, we had her looking straight at us. But I think the profile worked really well because then we got to show her looking upwards. And I think one thing that you told me was kind of the main message of the book, I guess, is the eyes wide open, right? Can you talk about eyes wide open?
That was a really important part for me in terms of just writing the story in general, in terms of, I feel like a lot of times in life, especially when it's seasons that are harder or when we're doing a lot of things, we pay less attention to the stuff around us. We tend to miss a lot of the things that are beautiful and are good in just like everyday life. And so for Annika in the story, that's something that she's been wrestling with, and we kind of walk with her through that. And so the searching, the looking, and the finding were things that were really important to me. And that was something that, I guess that was probably one of the things that you mentioned in our talk, was just that concept of like the looking and the eyes open to what you're actually seeing around you.
Yeah.
So
there's another quote that really sticks with me from the book, find the beauty. And find the beauty in the small things is something that I think that's a really good nugget from the book that, yeah, I wanted to grab. So anyway, that's why she's looking up on the cover. And in the cloak, we've got the stag, the axe, lantern, the spinning wheel, all the different animals that kind of pop up through the story. There's a mitten in the bottom left. I was trying to see, this is like the most Easter eggy one as well.
Yeah.
There's a sun on the left. One of the scenes that really like struck me reading it is, and I don't know if this made the final cut, but when she goes and sees the sunset. Okay, good. So if you've read the full final draft, when she finds the sunset, it's like the only color in the world. Yeah, I just thought wow, a photographer wrote this book, because she put an image straight into my brain, which was amazing. Yeah, so these were the 3 concepts that we went with, and we did them in black and white. And there are, when you send, or at least in other projects, when I've sent concept drawings to clients, I try to stay really impartial. Like, I don't care which one they pick. I'm happy with any of them. But I was like, I really hope she picks the middle one, because I like it the best. So I think we were on the same page with that. So then I got to do the fun part of painting. So I did a lot of watercolor, a lot of, this on the far right is acrylic on tissue paper, which gives like a really nice, like, wrinkly, textury-ness. And then on the far left, this is the first time I've used it, and I think Frostlight is the perfect project for it, but this is washi paper. So it's like a really thin, kind of translucent Japanese paper that has dried leaves and flowers pressed into it. So I sent that picture to Danielle and was like, what do you think of using this in the cover? And she was
like, I have no idea how you're going to do that. Go for it.
But plants are such a big part of the story, and especially like preserving plants. So I thought washi paper was absolutely perfect for it. So I didn't, I just painted these like straight onto paper, just trying to get colors and textures, and then I scanned all of those into my computer and did kind of a digital collage, where on the left-hand side you can see these are just flat digital colors that I drew in, and I did this for the cover as well, and then would copy-paste my textures into those shapes, and then draw on top of them with a digital brush. So it was kind of like cutting those shapes digitally out of the papers that I had made before. So I think of it as kind of a digital collage. And then I drew on top of it for hours and hours and hours in Photoshop, and sent a version to Danielle. This was the first final version of the cover that I sent to her. And she was like, I really love the composition, I love what's happening, but the colors aren't right. And we kept going back and forth on the colors for a long time. And finally, I think, let me go back a few. You sent me a bunch of photos, like this one with the trees right here. A bunch of blue photos. She was like, this is the color that I'm going for. And so I tweaked that one, so you can see this really dark blue, like this royal blue in the background. And then when we switched it to that icy, like green blue, I thought it just like sings. I don't know. That last color change was like, boom, that's it.
We're done.
We're locked in. So yeah, this is the final artwork. We did the cover on the left here, and then on the right, we did a set of bookmarks, which you can take home with you today.
Over there.
The fun part about the bookmarks, so we got to, the nice thing is that there are only 5 characters, or 5 major characters in this book, so I got to draw them all. Sorry. So we've got Yor on the left, Pevi, Alvia, and Goran. And I got to draw them all together, and the bookmarks each feature one character, but when you put them side by side, it's one continuous picture. So then it went to publishing. How was the publishing process? I mean, that was kind of a part that I wasn't involved in at all.
It was a little bit crazy. So as I mentioned talking earlier, I decided not to go with the traditional publisher on this. I actually ended up self-publishing because I wanted to actually still have control over the project, especially when it comes out, since it is a story about winter. With a winter publishing house and it was released in like summer, that would be a little awkward. So I ended up doing traditional publishing and did it in 10 months, I think, which was crazy, and I don't recommend it at all, ever. It can be done, as you see, but I don't recommend it. Mostly that just worked out because I had a bunch of people that I know who were really invested in the project, and my editor, she's actually a homeschool mom who was really flexible, who lives in Pennsylvania, and she was just super easy to work with and super fun, and made that possible because she was willing to get it back to me within a month, which is,
that's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. And so she did that really, really fast, and everything just worked really, really fast. And she was really fast.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah. So all those things together made that possible. As far as the publishing process goes, it wasn't nearly as hard as I thought it was going to be. So if any of you guys are looking at publishing, it's a lot of stress in terms of you have a lot of things going into it and there's a lot of pressure, but it's not really as difficult in terms of the actual thing itself as I thought it was going to be. But
yeah. And the last step of it, I guess, was when you brought, again, I was here at the library, and you brought the book, and you were like, you brought the first proof, which had like fake reviews from different people. I think somebody, was it Joe, that wrote like, it makes me want to go stand barefoot in the snow, or Joshua, yeah. And yeah, now it's a book that you can buy on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and you can check it out from the Washington County Public Library once Alyssa's done with it. Yeah, this has just been the greatest. I mean, I think books have always been, reading books and seeing illustrated books is what made me want to be an illustrator. And so getting to do my first book project with you was just absolutely a grace of God and a joy.
And you, I honestly can't imagine doing anyone else because she was already invested in the project beforehand. So once she got in there, she was like, yes, let's do this thing. I was like, okay.
It's just like doing fan art. What I was doing anyway.
All right.
Well, do we want to take some questions? Do any of you have questions about the book?
Or about publishing process? Yeah.
So, you said it was some time ago that you started writing this book. When was it?
I started in October of 2020.
Okay, not that long ago.
No. So I did the entire project from start to finish in less than 2 years. No, exactly 2 years. Exactly 2 years. So.
But talk about, you know, like a time of hopelessness and sadness.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
It was exciting. So. Yes.
Did you always know you wanted to be an author?
Actually, no. I've been writing since I was 5. I wrote my first book when I was 5 years old in honor of my sister Lydia. And I was never planning on publishing anything. I thought about it a little bit when I was in my earlier teen years and then was like, nah, that sounds like a lot of work. And it's also one of those funny things that when you think about it, you're like, well, who would buy books that I wrote anyway? And the answer is that you pretty much, no matter who you are, you have a lot of people around you who do love you and are happy to get to encourage you and support you in what you're doing. So, which I had in abundance, which I'm really thankful for, but I was not planning on ever publishing a book until, I guess, 2 years ago. So, no, a year ago. 1 year ago. So, yeah.
Hi, Sally.
I had 2 questions.
Okay.
One's for Danielle, and I was wondering, do you have like a, I'd like to read about how authors write. Like, do you have a writing room, or do you have a disciplined time? I'm writing from 7 to 9, or do you wait until the muse appears, or how does that go for you?
So I am what you call in writing terms a pantser, meaning that I do everything but the seat of my pants when I'm writing. So I wrote on weekends. There was one particular weekend last, I guess in the spring of 2021, that I wrote for like 8 hours straight and wrote about 11,000 words in one day. And then I didn't write anything for like a month. So I write in spurts and stuff. I don't usually wait for the muse because I think most of the time writing block in particular can be cured just by taking a walk, going and praying, or by watching a movie or reading another book. So those were all tools that I used. In terms of dedicated time to it, I'm also a full-time photographer, which Annie mentioned. So when I'm not editing or doing stuff, I would usually use my evenings to get to write as kind of like a decompression thing, which was a lot of fun. But I don't usually have any scheduled actual time, which I hope answers your actual question.
Exactly what I wanted to know. And then Annie knows that I'm in love with her stuff. I look at it all the time on Instagram. And I don't know that I've ever asked you this question, but when did you realize, or when did you start drawing, and then kind of realize that I think I've got some talent? Maybe your parents realized, or something. I don't know. I was just curious.
I started drawing in my mom's books and on the wall.
Which
My parents didn't really think I was super talented then. But then in middle school, high school, I just realized it was something that I really enjoyed and kept plugging away on. But like you, I didn't really realize that it was an option to do professionally until people started saying, like, I want to hire you to draw things for me. And I was like, why? But also just having people around me encouraging me, and my parents absolutely encouraging me to keep drawing and to, I think, just, the Lord gave me an interest in it more than anything else. And so I think just continuing to pursue that and strengthen that has been just a huge gift. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Lydia.
Hi, this is a question for Annie more particularly. I kind of feel about it already, but I'm gonna ask.
Okay.
Would you at any point draw the dogs on bookmarks as well? Because I really want to have bookmarks for them, that's all.
Okay, we talked about this yesterday. So, Goran, the character on the far left, or far right rather, had the character on the far left, the character on the far right, who's a different guy, he has 3 dogs that are become very important to the story. But dogs are like my Waterloo as an artist. And I had several sketches where the dogs, I think there was, when I originally sketched his bookmark, the dogs were in it. But you can see even then I just did the outline because I was like, these dogs are so important to the story and I just know that I'm going to mess them up. So my resolution with Danielle is to practice drawing dogs this year. And then maybe I'll do an extra little apocryphal drawing of the dogs. Yeah.
Yes, Becca.
What character was the hardest for you to write?
So that probably is actually a tie between Pebby and Goran. I actually, the first draft of this book, I finished it and then realized that Pebby had no personality at all. And I had to go through and rechart his entire background and his entire life story and be like, okay, how does he talk? How does he carry himself? Theater helps. And all those kinds of things because he did not make any sense to me at first. And I was like, he's a really important character, obviously because there are only 5 in the entire book. And so he was probably the hardest. And then Goran, I really struggled with the first draft writing him just because he doesn't talk much. And writing somebody and communicating their thoughts and their presence in a room when they don't talk is harder than I gave it credit for. So,
but he's a still waters run deep kind of person. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So. Yeah, no way.
What exactly inspired the writing of this book? Is it based on real events in your own life?
There were a lot of things that inspired it. I have had an affinity for winter for a long time. It's one of my favorite seasons, probably actually initially because nobody else liked it. And I was like, I'm gonna like winter. But then later on, I really love the stillness of winter, and I really love how in the brownness and in the grayness, you can see all that detail, because there's so much detail that God put into creation, and you can't see all of that in summertime because there's so much else that's living and growing on top of it. And so I always love that about winter. And I remember a few years ago, I actually was talking to a mom friend of mine at church, and she was talking about how she recently come to really appreciate and enjoy winter, and talking about how much of a time of rest it was, which was something that I hadn't ever thought of. And so after that, I was talking to another friend of mine who gets seasonal depression, and I was like, you know what? We have so much to appreciate in so many different seasons. I want to write a book about winter. And then I didn't do anything with it for a year. So I guess that was probably one of the biggest things about it. I also have always really loved the Nordic type culture, which there's a little bit of hints of that in there. And I really love small scope stories in terms of the ones that aren't not huge adventures or battle scenes or any of those things, the ones that just give you a taste of everyday life and make you think about your life. I love those kinds of stories. And so that was one of the big things for this story that inspired it more, was just the idea of the small things. So, yeah. Joseph.
So going back to backstory, do you find that when you're trying to find the characters, do you find it easier to find out who they are in writing them within the scope of the story, or writing their backstory?
Backstory, for sure. I generally cannot understand a character until I've mapped out 5 years of their life, at least before the story, and then their initial childhood, to actually track how they became who they are, so you can tell how they present themselves and how they talk and interact and everything. So,
especially in this story, like everybody's past kind of comes to bear on them in the current struggles that they're having. Yeah. I also deal with seasonal depression, and when I was reading the book, I kept messaging Danielle, like, everybody needs some vitamin D in this book. Like, everybody just get a heat lamp and some vitamin D and we'll be okay. Yep.
yes.
Anna, hi.
Okay, there are two questions. One, it's for both of you, but
Okay.
different questions.
Okay.
One, who's your favorite character you wrote for the book? And that's for Danielle. Two,
I didn't write the book. Yeah.
what's your favorite character you drew? What inspired you?
Okay.
You go first.
Oh, dang.
I can go.
Go ahead.
Okay, so favorite character initially for me was definitely Annika. I had a blast writing her because she's just a lot of fun as a person, because she's energetic and she kind of enjoys life, and even at the beginning she definitely didn't. But as I was writing it, I was like, oh no, this character's my favorite character. No, this character's my favorite character. So in the end, it's a cop-out answer, but I genuinely do like all of them equally. I still find Goran the most interesting, probably followed by Yor, because Yor is just a neat guy. So,
Yeah, I would also have to say, I mean, Annika is definitely the one that I spent most time on because she's on the cover. But I also really love drawing hair, and I love drawing curly hair. And so she was great. And then and freckles, I also love drawing freckles. On the bookmarks, it was really fun to draw Heavy, actually, because I haven't drawn that many characters of color up until this point, and something that I'm trying to work on a little bit more. So drawing his hair, drawing his facial features, and paying attention to things that would make him look really authentically black. Yeah.
yes, person.
Who was the easiest character to draw?
Alvia. Because girls with tidy hair. Yeah, she was the easiest, definitely. Dudes with beards is something that I'm very proud to have gotten some practice on this project, because my sketchbook's not super filled with dudes with beards. I much more draw like princesses and things like that. So Alvia, yes. Hi.
Why didn't you make a bookmark of the main character?
Because she's on the cover of the book. Yeah.
We figured people who get the bookmarks, most of them will also own the book, so they can put the bookmarks next to the book and be like, look, yep, all the characters.
And she'll be like giant compared to everybody else.
Yes.
What inspired each of your characters?
Oh boy. So originally when I was plotting this story, there actually were only 2 siblings, and there were a couple of other characters who do not actually appear in the story. So originally, Yor and Annika were the only siblings. Yor's name was something totally different that I don't remember, and was way too complicated. And so Yor was mostly, oh man, I'm at the wrong time ago.
You sent me a whole list one time of like what everybody's name almost was. And I was
Almost
like,
was,
yeah, that
very
doesn't seem
funny.
right though.
No, it didn't. I guess Goran was inspired by a lot of the harshness, but he also was inspired in part by a lot of the folk tales that I read growing up, because he's very much of a folktale type character. He's a woodsman who lives in the woods with his hounds. Like, that is very much a folktale character, even though he doesn't have a particularly folktale background. Alvia was actually partially inspired. She was inspired by a couple of characters who I really loved and respected growing up, who were very down to earth and very much put themselves out there for their family, but were very like precise about it, which she is, and also partially inspired by, it was a book that I loved growing up called The Witch of Blackbird Pond, which is
Love that book.
And there's a character in there whose name's Mercy, who's like really sweet, and she is one of the strongest people in that entire book, and she also, she has a bad leg and gets around with crutches. And she was one of the most interesting characters I ever read about growing up. And so when I was writing this book, I was like, Alvia would make so much more sense in terms of the way that she struggles and the way that she strives and the way that she tries to interact with the world if she was someone who had wrestled with some of the similar things. Heavy, I don't know that I can tell you what inspired him. He was just, he was a lot of fun to write, but I don't know what originally inspired him in terms of this random dude who just comes out of the woods one day. And then Yor was actually also inspired. He was inspired kind of by, there were a few books that I read close together when I was probably like 17 or 18, some of which are written by Stephen Lawhead, and others are written by Rosemary Sutcliffe. And they're all kind of adventure tales with all guys who like, you know, go out and do the thing and do the right thing and save the girl, and a lot of them have hard backgrounds or like fall into hardships. And Yor kind of came out of that. He originally was a lot less frustrated than he was actually when I started writing the book. He was going to be like the one stable sibling who was like, oh yeah, everything's okay, we can do this. And that obviously isn't how he
Now
came
there
out
are
of the
zero
story.
stable siblings.
Now there's zero stable siblings. So yeah, so I guess that is pretty much a very long answer to a very short question.
Yes, Susan.
So you were talking about like the backstory and plotting it out. Did you spend time before you started writing doing that, and like were you doing that in your head or on paper, or did you start writing and then think, okay, I have enough and I'm gonna try to plot this out, or how did that kind of go?
So for the backstory, that was actually funny. I'd written on his backstory before I started writing the book, and she made perfect sense to me. I was like, this is great. Characters make so much sense. And then I got through most of the first draft and realized that Annika's character makes sense, but I had spent zero time plotting anybody else's backstory or characters, which I mentioned earlier. So I had to go back through and redo that, which I'm going to do differently now. But this was definitely a learning process for me, and this is the first book that I've written that I really spent time on the characters. Previously, I'd done more adventure epic type stories with like 80 million characters, and it's harder to track characters in that kind of setting. So I guess I did spend more time after writing it, whereas if I was to do it now, I would spend way more time beforehand. I guess that, if that answers your question.
Can I also just say that Anne was a great choice?
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed it so much. It was such a strong story to work on.
Yes, Joshua.
So did you do something as far as the plot, as far as like kind of knowing where the story was going to go in the beginning, or was it more setting up the world and then seeing where that went?
So for this particular book, there's another one that I'm currently working on where I set the world first. For this particular book, I actually had a vague concept of where I knew the characters needed to end up at the end. The rest of the story, I cannot plot a book to save my life. Like, I tried it before, and I wrote everything down, and I put that book aside, and I have never touched it again. Because as soon as I plotted it out, I was like, I hate this so much. So, I can't plot. More of what was going through was, in terms of the actual plotting, was, in my head when I'm writing, I picture, like, strings and a loom, and, like, keeping all the strings taut. And that, for me, gives me the ability to keep writing and keep a consistent story, and keep it well plotted, even though I haven't actually mapped out exactly where everything is going. So I had a few scenes I knew wanted to happen at some point, because they would kind of bring things that needed to happen to pass. But most of the story was just kind of as we were going, I was like, okay, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the weaving, the loom, actually, because Alvia is constantly weaving through the story. It's like her coping mechanism. And so you thinking of the story as, string on a loom. On the bookmarks, I wanted to incorporate the string or like the thread between all of them. So that wasn't even something that we talked about, but I'm glad, I'm glad that you had that in mind, because that definitely showed through. Yeah.
Yes, Joe.
Did your writing change at all? You wrote for a long time in solitude and not for an audience necessarily, not for anyone thinking you were going to publish anything.
Mm-hmm.
So did you feel like once you went back and you decided to publish it and you were editing, did you feel like your writing changed in any way, or the way you wrote changed, writing for an audience rather than just writing for yourself?
I guess it did. One of the biggest reasons that I did was actually just because as soon as I started sharing with other people, I was asking specifically for feedback.
Mm.
And one of the things that I didn't realize until I actually went through the publishing process was when you're watching a movie, you know that there are like a million people that worked on that movie that all contributed their gifts and their skills and their talents to that movie. when you're reading a book, you don't really think about that. You think about the writer, and you think about maybe the artist if the cover art is particularly striking or if there are illustrations. But otherwise, you may think about the editor, maybe. But one thing I realized with this story was that there actually, the acknowledgement to the back of the book really mattered. Because for every book, there are like 100 people who worked on that book to get it to where it was, and I definitely had that with this story in terms of like Mr. Alford and Madeline and Phoebe and a whole bunch of other people, Annie and Katie, who all gave feedback, which did affect my writing, which did positively affect now how I will work in books in the future, because I understand more of what communicates clear thoughts and what communicates clear characters and concepts and stuff in terms of just making it happen. But I don't think my writing voice changed much. If that answers your question.
Yes.
I have a question. How's your next book going?
It's going well. So I actually only started a few weeks ago because I started after I finished Frostlight, the final publication on, I guess that was, it released December 15th. So I only started a few weeks ago, but it's going well, and I'm hoping to get it into you guys' hands sometime in 2025. So,
Yay!
Because I'm not doing a 2-year publication process.
Cool. Well, if we've talked through everything we want to talk through, we were talking about how there was a library selfie like at the very beginning of this process, and a library selfie when the first proof came out. So we thought we would love if you guys are game to do a big group selfie to commemorate the first author talk from the book.